welcome into Anita on the Mark, but of course it's a different scenario. I'm not talking sports. I'm talking P. Diddy with my very good friend Nevin Shapiro. So we're going beyond the Mark, and we've got a very special guest who's joining us this afternoon, and that is Mark Eiglarsh, of course, one of the best defense attorneys in the country. So Mark, we're really thrilled to have you on our show with us. How are you doing?
I'm choosing to be wonderful. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I love that answer. I'm going to plagiarize. Let's dive right into it. And I want to start with what happened today. This is day 2 of the Diddy trial, and then we could work our way back because I have some questions in regard to the jury and whatnot. But today really was the big one because Cassie Ventura testified, who was, obviously is the biggest witness, took the stand, talked about physical abuse, talked about the freak offs, which she said included the hiring of escorts and some of the things that were performed on her under the direction of Diddy were just actually really too disgusting to mention in full detail. But nonetheless, Mark, let's start with you in regard to her testimony today. How damaging was it?
Well, this is colossal, meaning that this isn't a minor witness. You've only got 2 victims or alleged victims. A third one they can't find. So everything comes down to the testimony of these 2, and they have to believe her. And, in one respect, we start off, the traditional notion is, okay, someone makes you do something that you don't want to do, you leave. But she didn't. She stayed for years. Now, that's not abnormal behavior for someone who's being abused. They'll have to have experts to explain that. But it makes it more challenging for the government when somebody stays sex act after sex act after sex act, constantly staying with someone who's allegedly forcing you to do something when the defense is simply saying it was consent.
Nevin, your thoughts on today's
Well, first of all, I agree with Mark's statement. When you sit and listen to Cassie or whatever, how it's been reported, what she said, you can't help but come away and think that this guy is the most despicable human being on earth, and that's coming from a guy like me who is charged with a $930 million. He makes me look like Sister Teresa. That's how despicable he is. And saying that, does that mean he's guilty of what they're charging him with and what they're going after him with? Therein lies, I think, the greatest question, and I've had it since this whole situation began. He is a despicable human being, but is he guilty of what they're coming after him with?
And let's just really quick, what is he being charged for, right? 5 criminal counts, 1 count of racketeering conspiracy, 2 counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud or coercion, and 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution.
Yeah. It's important to note what he's not charged with. That's the important place to start. And the defense made that very clear in their opening. He's not charged with domestic violence. So the videotape, which we've all seen, which shows beyond all doubt that he is an abhorrent, immoral, raunchy, violent human being, that's not what he's charged with. You understand? So, and nor is he charged with being an immoral, disgusting, freak off, lube loving guy. He's charged with specifically being the Tony Montana of the lube world. And they've got to prove those requisite criminal acts in order to show that. Plus sex trafficking. Most people don't have a vision of what he allegedly did when you talk about sex trafficking. Same with racketeering. Doesn't mean they can't prove it. It just means it's more difficult.
Just to go back to your original point, Mark, in regard to, and I agree with you, if somebody's on, you've got a juror who doesn't live this type of lifestyle, which is, very like foreign to probably the majority of our country who are following this trial saying, how does this guy live like this? But why did she stay? She obviously was terrified of him. For her life, for her future, possibly her family, and why she stayed. And that was another thing that I got from her testimony. Granted, I'm not in the courtroom, but everything that I'm reading and following in regard to her testimony, she was terrified.
Yeah, and if the jurors find that to be the case, then that's a problem for the defense. But you haven't heard cross-examination, and they're going to dissect every single day, every single act, every shopping spree, every amount that she put into her account, every time that she could have left. And I'm not saying that she wasn't abused. I'm just saying it's tougher to prove because she stayed in there all this time.
Now, there's been two other witnesses that did address the court on Monday. Okay, one was an LAPD officer, Israel Flores. He was part of the hotel security. Of course, the video that we mentioned where Diddy got extremely violent with her, and of course we've all seen that video time and time and time again. And that was the hallway at the Intercontinental Hotel. And of course, he testified that he witnessed it. Former hotel security guard responded to the incident and saw it all. And then also Daniel Phillip was the male escort who apparently, allegedly, Diddy hired from 2012 to 2013 and testified about a number of sexual encounters that he had with Cassie and all the things that P. Diddy made him do. Mark, in regard to those testimonies on as well as hers, do you feel that supports what he's on trial for, all of it combined?
Yeah, if believed, it goes a long way towards proving some of the elements. Absolutely. It also goes a long way towards showing bad character, which they're not supposed to do, but they're doing. It's intertwined in what they're trying to prove. And so it makes them not like him. It is not an easy scenario to like him with these facts.
Nevin?
Yeah, my thoughts are the prosecution came out really like labeling what this guy is, and they've painted a picture, and it's very, very hard. I mean, 99% of the world has seen this video already. You can't unsee it. Now you're actually given details behind what he did, which led to, let's say, that video. I go back to my original statement. He's just a despicable person, but is it enough to convict him? And like Mark says, if the elements add up, well, now you got something. But I think this is going to be, this is a very hard case to prove, in my opinion. Mark's the legal expert, but I just have been in that seat, and I know what they're staring at.
So, Mark, we have allegedly we have two more victims that are going to testify. Victim number 2, referred to as Jane, described as a single mother who met Combs in 2020. Prosecutors said she fell in love with Combs, quickly had a non-exclusive relationship with him, and ended in abuse. So very similar to what we're hearing and seeing with Cassie, maybe to not the as long as that lasted. And then victim number 4, Mia, was described as a former personal assistant who worked for Combs. According to prosecution, during their opening statement, she allegedly is just beginning to grapple with the times that Combs forced himself on her and wanted to keep the secret, of course, and not letting that revealed. So there are still victim number 2 and victim number 4. As we alluded to, victim number 3, allegedly they can't find victim number 3. She is missing. But we still have 2 more victims that are going to testify. Your thoughts on that?
Okay, Harvey Weinstein. Look, he was convicted, and ultimately the case is being retried, but he was convicted because there were so many different victims who testified. Ultimately, the appellate court said, wait, too many, that wasn't right. But we do know that the more you hear cumulative stories about somebody, the more there are to be believed. And if more people are saying his modus operandi is to use violence to get people to do things, the less likely it is that he'll be acquitted.
Let's talk about jury selection, right? Because, again, at the end of the day, he's on trial for 5 counts, criminal counts. The prosecution's trying to prove it. At the end of the day, this jury is going to make that final. Take that 8 men, 4 women, 6 alternates, 4 men, 2 women. And again, the reports are that the prosecution was more aggressive in not allowing African Americans to be on the jury than men. Is that a strategy you feel will benefit the prosecution, looking at this jury? And by the way, an older jury, right? 68 years old, 72 years old, 69 years old, 51-year-old.
Yeah.
In looking at this jury, who do you think this jury benefits more?
I would say the defense first, in that there's no one under 30. Anyone under 30 would be, I think, taken back by a lot of the things that the defense has to concede, a lot of the behavior that is just intolerable and they can never imagine. So, strike against the prosecution that there's no one young there. Is it uncommon for prosecutors to use race the same way the defense does? Of course that happens. That's why they came out with case law where you can challenge the strike because it's not a race neutral reason. It doesn't surprise me they tried to get rid of black jurors. That's, those who generally would be more favorable. Again, we were generalizing. We don't know anything. But this case does come down to jury selection. I'm glad you're talking about it. You must, as I said, you must find jurors who are lube qualified. And I came up with that to mean those who can put aside all of the abhorrent acts that they're going to hear about. It's going to be bad. They're going to show videos of freak-offs. People are not familiar with that kind of lifestyle. So they're going to have judgment and disdain. The question is whether they can put that aside and focus on the elements of the crime. And I'm telling you, that is not easy to do.
Nevin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a question actually for Mark. So let's say we're obviously in the first inning. Like there's a lot of innings left in this fight, right? It's going to ebb and flow. What's going to happen. Let's say the government starts feeling as if they're losing the strength of their case. Do they drop the RICO? Is that a possibility? They drop the RICO and they go the angle of the other charges?
The direct answer is anything is possible. I don't see that happening. They know what their case is, and unless they have problems proving it, they ain't dropping it down. They'll keep it there and let the jurors find lesser included offenses or find them guilty of something else. But that's a tremendous sign of weakness, one that, as a trial lawyer, I always welcome. Really, you want to reduce the charge? You want to get rid of stuff? I'm fine with that. Then I argue to the jury, ladies and gentlemen, when we started this journey, these were the charges. All that remains now is X, Y, and Z. That doesn't bode well for the government. So I don't think that they'll drop anything down.
Poker game. Yeah. Real poker game. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mark, back to day one with the opening statements. Very dear friend of mine, Kathy Fleming, was on our first episode, and she's a white collar defense attorney. And she said that she feels that a jury's decision is made 65% of the time. A jury's decision on guilty or not guilty is made in the opening statements. First things first, do you believe in that or not?
100%. I can't quantify whether it's 65% or 70 or 80%, but I teach trial advocacy at the law school, and I have for years, and I've been trying cases for 30 years. And I know for a fact that jurors are pretty much on one side or another very early on in the case. I'll go one step further. I think that even in jury selection, if you're doing it right, I think that they start to pick a side. Who do they like more? If you're advocating and pre-trying your case in jury selection, which you're not supposed to do, but I do all the time, then I think that they start picking a side. But by opening statement, for sure, they're starting to lean, if not already be in a camp, and it's hard to get them over.
So with that being said, the prosecution came to the table, talked about the inner circle, how Diddy had, a crime enterprise covering up all the things that he did. I heard that Emily Johnson was superb in her opening statements, talked about Cassie and all that she suffered. And again, that the jury will see the freak off videos. As for the defense, and I find it interesting, the defense came out and said, listen, don't be the moral police. Just because Diddy doesn't live the life that you live, don't judge him for it. Based on the information that you've acquired with the opening statements, who do you feel did better?
They both did an outstanding job. I don't mean to be neutral. I've never been that guy, but the government needed to say certain things, and they did. And I was watching the defense. Garagos's daughter had to say certain things. On my checklist of things that she had to say, she hit them all. You have to say you're dealing with a reprehensible human being who's a drug user, who's a violent person, who commits acts of domestic violence. She got all that out. So jurors are like, okay, you're being honest with us. We'll stay with our commitment to only look at the criminal charges that are pending in front of us.
Do you think the jury seeing these freak off videos, what type of reaction do you think those are going to have on this jury?
The question presupposes that I know each of these people's journeys and their life experiences and their thought processes, right? So I see freak off videos. I go, okay, so what? Maybe not something I do. And wow, that's unusual. That's a generous amount of lube he's using there. But that has nothing to do with the criminal case itself. So it really just presupposes that I know these jurors' individual pasts, right? And we just don't know. We also know that there's potential stealth jurors, those who say they can be fair, but are on there to carry out a hidden agenda. Like, I'm going to get this guy, or you know what? The government, they overreach all the time. This is my chance to show the defense I'm with them. So you never know.
Side note with the freak off videos, I was reading media lawyer, is it Robert Balin, is arguing that news organizations should be able to view the government's freak off videos, saying that telling the judge that it is important that the press and the people through the press be able to see justice being done, quote unquote. Do you agree with that?
Sounds like there's a guy who wants to see some freaky videos.
Okay.
You know, do I think the media should see what the judge allows them to see. And I don't know whether federal courts are very liberal in saying, here, media, which we don't even want your cameras in here, but here, let me just give you all the evidence so you can poison the jury somehow. No, I'm okay with them keeping things close to the vest, as much as I'd love to see these videos as well.
All right, Mark, I'm going to dummy it down, right? Because I feel like the conversation that the three of us are having really is all about, based on what we've seen, and as Nevin points out, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. I know we're only on day 2, but we're sitting here and we're like, not sure if the prosecution really is proving their case. But like, there's a lot of people out there who I've just mentioned the 5 counts. But if you could be so kind to break it down in layman's terms for people, right? So 1 count of racketeering conspiracy. What does that mean? What does the prosecution have to prove in order for the jury to say, okay, guilty?
Yeah, that he committed a bunch of different crimes as part of the head of a criminal organization, right? It means enhanced penalties. It means a much more serious crime. So that there were a number of crimes committed. And I think that the list includes kidnapping, bribery, arson, trafficking. There's a bunch of other offenses that then are carried out at the helm, at the direction of the guy at the top. So that's racketeering.
Sex trafficking by force. Now, one thing that we did hear is that these freak offs and these escorts for hire happen in a number of places, even out of the United States.
Well, that's the challenge, right? If you hire trafficking, if you traffic in prostitutes and they cross state lines and they come here and you know about it, that's a problem. And I say know about it because I'm adding in what I think may be the best defense, and that is, look, I run an enterprise, albeit a freaky enterprise, not a criminal one, and I got people who handle that stuff. I don't check where fallopia, cinnamon, amber, and toilette are coming in from. I just enjoy the freaky with them. And so if somebody did that, you don't attribute the mens rea, the state of mind, to me for that.
Interesting. So a few things, and again, this is our first opportunity to have you on the show. And it's been stated that Diddy turned down a plea agreement. Do you agree with apparently 2 that were offered to him? If you were defending him, based on what we know right now at the end of day 2 of this trial happening, do you feel this was a wise decision for him to go to court?
Well, it depends. First and foremost, I don't know what the offer was. Secondly, federal court's different than state court. Nobody makes you an offer of a guaranteed set of prison years like they would in state court. 99% of the time, judges just ratify whatever state prosecutors and the defense agree with. Federal court, it's different. It's we'll make certain recommendations, we'll plead to just these charges, but then ultimately the judge consents you to whatever the judge wants. And in federal court, that can happen. The judge can deviate above the guidelines, even if the prosecutor says, I'm going to recommend a guideline sentence. So my guess is, with his lawyers, he felt that best case scenario, he's probably looking at decades in prison, and he might as well roll the dice.
Excuse me, Anita. That's a great point and a segue for me.
Yeah, Nevin, that was my door to you. Mark, Nevin and I, we talked a few times during the course of the day, and he came up with a really interesting scenario that very well could present itself with Diddy. Continues. Go ahead, Nevin.
Well, first of all, what Mark just said is 1,000% correct. I was offered a 10-year plea, which I accepted, and the judge gave me a 20-year sentence. So she gave me a 2.5 level upward departure. I thought I was going to Mars, and she sent me to uranium. Yeah. That's for one. So he has to roll the dice, like we discussed on our very first episode. Like his downside is so bad that he might as well just shoot for the moon, because that's how bad he's looking. He's looking into the abyss. He may walk out of it, but he's looking into it at this very moment. One of the things that I think is, what could become Diddy's parachute? Obviously, we're at the very, very early stages. We're going to get a vibe, and you're going to know within that courtroom. Obviously, we're not in there. We're just getting the play-by-play, on satellite delay, let's just say. And so what's going to happen is a parachute for Diddy at the end of the day may be the government just saying, listen, what can you tell us? Who do you got? Can you cooperate up? He may end up in that. There may be names that no one's even looking at right now, and I'm not about to speculate other than whatever I've heard through the media, and I'm not going to say names. But when you're in a position, when there's someone above you, there's always a parachute waiting for you. In my case, personally, I was at the top of my food chain. So it was all or nothing for me. And I know what I was staring at. It may not be the same case for Puffy. And I think down the road, don't be shocked if he just drops a lot of names. And I had sent you earlier today, Anita, R. Kelly's current status in the BOP, his outdate, 2045. What he's staring at, not a far difference from that exit.
I don't see him doing it, if he does it at all, anytime soon. I think he's arrogant. Right. I think he's confident. He's dropping millions of dollars into this defense, and he knows all it takes is 1 out of 12 to hang the jury up so they don't have a unanimous decision, and he'll keep doing that if he has to keep going to trial. He just wants to avoid being convicted. I cannot see him, number one, being a snitch, and number two, I don't see the government trusting his word enough that they're willing to sell their soul in this case, a very high-profile case, to get the lube distributor or somebody who's out there really that he can really give up, that they can trust his word and that they don't know about. I mean, you make a good point, and I do think it's possible. I'm just going to say that I don't think it's likely.
I don't necessarily think Nevin's talking about like the baby oil designer, right, Nev? I mean, I think we're talking right. So, like you're talking, bigger fish in the entertainment world. And again, we don't want to name names. That's not what we're here to do. But you're talking about bigger fish in the entertainment world that potentially may have been involved in a lot of this.
Yeah, no question, Anita. So what I meant with my theory or possible theory where things could end up is because I've been through my own trial in my own world. Now, I didn't go to trial, but I've been through my own trial and tribulations within the federal system. And what I mean by that is there's been a number of names mentioned, right? There's been a number of names mentioned, and I'm not going to use the names. Anyone can go Google and follow the stories and what names have come out there and this and that. But when I say going much bigger, I'm talking about literally crushing the music industry and going right to the top of the food chain. Who that is, I'm not at liberty to say because I don't know. But I can tell you, Puffy's not the biggest guy in the music industry. There are people above him. And I'm just saying, if it got down to that point, and and I'm not saying he's a snitch. I'm not saying he's not. I'm not saying that in any way. But what I am saying is when you're looking at it's the rest of your life or nothing, you're going to consider all options. For me personally, I wasn't in that position. There was no opportunities to talk about anything. I was at the top of the food chain in my world, in my case. But it could happen. It could happen. It's a very viable situation. And I certainly wasn't talking about the lube distributors. I was talking about people that make shit happen in this massive industry, which is as big as big pharma, like in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I don't think that would be that outlandish. But again, you know, and not to take anything away from Cassie's, you know, appearance today in court, and in some of the things that she shared was just absolutely horrific.
It's deplorable.
In talking to Mark and talking to a number of other attorneys, and I was expecting the prosecution to come out with a much more powerful punch, especially with her being like their lead witness, their lead victim. And that's not what I'm getting back. Again, I know it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. There's still a lot more to come out, but.
And those cross-examinations are going to be brutal against her. Not that poor girl didn't suffer, but there's going to be there's going to be a lot like, you know, why didn't you run? Why didn't you leave? This, you know, and you can't get into the jurors' heads. I do believe what Mark said is spot on. They've pretty much comprised probably a thought process already going into this, sort of like what our last guest, Kathy had said, the reason why 65% of the jury, you know, is one on opening arguments. But this is it's because everybody wants justice for the type of person he is. But did he break a federal law? Like, is he really guilty of what they're charging him with? And I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm not saying he's guilty. But this is a very tough case to prove. I've thought so from the beginning. Is he despicable? Well, everybody, you know, sees what that is. You know what I mean? But you'd rather be despicable as a free man than despicable as a way for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm.
Mark, moving forward, you know, what can we expect for the remainder of the week? Again, from what I understand, victims 2 and 4 are supposed to then what are we going to see Diddy take the stand? Like what happens moving forward now?
Okay, so anything is possible, but I strongly believe that the defense will do exactly what I do when I go to trial. Do everything in your power not to put the whole case in the hands of your client, who's not likable and on his best day will get eviscerated. So I would bet my kid's college fund that he does not take the witness stand. You just do not want your case to come down to that. You want it to come down to the defense showing motive, bias, interest, and vigorously cross-examining the witnesses who testify, leaving the jurors to say, I don't know, there's a reasonable doubt about their testimony. And while he's a despicable guy and he probably committed some offenses, they don't have proof beyond it to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt.
How difficult is that going to be for the defense to cross-examine Cassie, who has been through this? Oh, and by the way, is pregnant. Like that's got to be difficult, right? You got to be walking a fine line, Mark, right?
Right. I might be skeptical, but I think that the sex of the defense attorney was heavily discussed. I'm not saying that that's the only reason why she's handling this case. She's a very fine attorney, but Garagos's daughter instead of Mark Garagos, I think was a choice because, you know, if a man goes after some of these witnesses, they might be looked at as maybe too aggressive. So when a woman does it, maybe there's a difference. Again, these aren't my words. This is just the perception. So yeah, it's going to be difficult. That said, you know, if you start off slow and little by little, you start to get into it. And when the person, whichever witness it is, isn't being honest and straightforward, you now have latitude to start being a little bit more vehement, a little bit more zealous and strong. And you just see where that takes you.
Mark, any final thoughts before we let you go?
Yeah, like Nevin said, this is a journey. You know, cases aren't won in the first day or 2 or 3. It's not a boxing match. You got to wait. The prosecutors are laying out their case piece by piece by piece. They thought this out. It's the biggest case of their life. Give them time, but also pay close attention to cross-examination. So a lot of times in these cases, it's one step forward and then two steps back. So I think you're going to have blistering cross-examination of each of the victims because their testimony cannot be accepted if you're on the defense team.
Nevin?
Agree 100%. Again, this gets down to, first of all, Puffy's got 9 pit bulls working for him with a heavy bankroll to spare. And he'll bring in more relief pitchers if necessary. He's loaded up some team. This gets down to, is it Caligula or is it Al Capone? That's it. One guy's a racketeer. The other guy was a freak. And I really think that's the name of this case. It's Caligula versus Al Capone. Which one is it? And if it's and he's hoping he's Caligula because he's not going to prison.
All right, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Mark Eiglarsh was amazing. Nevin, you're always amazing. Such unbelievable insight. I tell you, I'm not just saying this because I'm a part of this team and this show, but I just from Mark to Kathy Fleming last week, the guests that we are bringing to this podcast, the attorneys, we're going to have FBI agents. And that type of intel and that type of knowledge, I feel in order to break down the information that's coming every second, every hour from this trial, I think is priceless. And I'm happy to be a part of this team with you, Nev. I really do appreciate
Thank you.
collabing with you. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Really do appreciate it. Our next podcast is going to drop on Friday. We'll recap what is transpired this week. Cross-examination, as Mark alluded to, is going to be quite interesting and I'm sure very dicey. So we'll dive into that. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your comments. And we will be on top of this trial from start to finish. And again, we really do appreciate you following, subscribing, and watching our podcast. Thank you, everybody.